Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Dorigo, and I'm the program coordinator at the New York League of Conservation Voters Education Fund. One of our goals is to educate the public to be our next generation of environmental leaders. We do that by building awareness, educating New Yorkers on climate policy, and developing recommendations for how to meet those objectives. We can't tackle climate change without addressing transportation, the #1 contributor to climate change in our state and nation. Transportation is responsible for 36% of our emissions in New York. The pollution caused by fossil fuel emissions has a significant impact on public health, impacts we saw all too clearly during the early days of the COVID crisis. That's why we're pushing for the electrification of school buses as part of our Clean Buses for Healthy Niños campaign. Transitioning to electric school buses would improve air quality, protect children's health from diseases like asthma, and bolster the fight against climate change. Zero-emission school buses are a focal point of President Biden's American Jobs Plan proposal. The plan will electrify at least 20% of school buses nationwide, includes $20 billion to electrify buses and $32 billion in financing to help electric vehicle manufacturing and address job creation. But there is still more work to be done. That's why we plan this webinar in partnership with Bedford 2030, Cure 100, Mothers Out Front, Sierra Club, Sustainable Hudson Valley, and Sustainable Westchester. We'll talk about why Hudson Valley School District should ditch dirty diesel buses and transition to emission-free school buses now. We'll hear firsthand experiences of dealing with the health effects of diesel emissions. We'll also discuss costs, available funding, and hear experiences from a local electric school bus pilot program. Before we get started, I'd like to note that this webinar is being recorded. There's also an option to leave questions for the speakers in the Q&A feature. We will address audience questions after our panel presentations. And now I'm pleased to welcome our first speaker, Patty Buchanan. Patty Buchanan is a leader of the electric school bus campaign for two intertwined community-based groups, Croton 100, which is the founding chapter of Cure 100, which stands for Communities United to Reduce Emissions 100%. Voters in Croton-on-Hudson approved funds for 3 electric school buses by 73% of votes in the May school ballot. Awesome. Welcome, Patty.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Lisa. I also want to thank all of the sponsors of this webinar. It really is a privilege to be here and to be part of this important conversation. So the starting place for understanding electric school buses, cost considerations, is our mindset. We need to shift our focus away from considering only purchase price and instead focus on the total cost of ownership. And by that, what I mean is we need to look at not just purchase price, but over time, how we will save money on fuel and maintenance with electric school buses that may help to lower our total cost of ownership. So let me speak a little more specifically about this. We know that generally electric school bus purchase prices are about 2 to 3 times the cost of a fossil fuel bus. But we also know that we can save money on fuel over time with an electric bus. And that's true for 3 reasons. First, electric motors are more efficient in converting energy to locomotion. So when a fossil fuel bus combustion engine burns fossil fuel, much of the energy in that process is wasted. It's released in the form of heat and smoke and sound that's not targeted toward locomotion. So it's wasted energy. In an electric motor, all of the electricity that is released as energy is used for locomotion. A second reason that fuel is less costly on an electric motor is because a unit of energy of electricity is less expensive than a unit of energy of fossil fuel. And then the third reason that we're able to save money on fuel in electric vehicles is because the motors of electric vehicles are designed with what's known now as regenerative braking. And in other words, when the vehicle decelerates, the friction in slowing the speed is directed back into the battery. So the battery actually charges as the vehicle decelerates. And this is apparently, especially apparent when, for example, an electric vehicle is going down a hill. As it slows down and while it's on the hill, the fuel actually goes in to charge the battery while the vehicle is driving. And we also save money over time with maintenance on electric vehicles. And that's because fossil fuel vehicles have much more complex engines. The combustion engine has things like oil that have to be replaced, oil filters, and we need labor for that. There's spark plugs and hoses, and there's carburetors and carburetor filters and tailpipes and exhaust systems. And all of these have parts and labor that add to the cost of maintenance. An electric vehicle is very simple. It's just a battery on wheels. And for this reason, the maintenance is much lower over time on an electric vehicle. So when we put these together, we find that there is a total cost of ownership analysis that helps us understand that the purchase price is offset over time by the savings on fuel and maintenance. So this is the mindset we want to have when we think about the cost of electric vehicles. Who do we want to share this mindset with? Well, what we want to do is have a team of champions to help us in our quest to get electric vehicles or electric school buses to our districts. The people we want to have on our team of champions would be, for example, the transportation supervisor at the school's district budget supervisor. Members of the Board of Education need to understand and share this mindset, along with PTA members, students, and parents, and our community advocates like chapters of Cure 100, like Croton 100, Mothers Out Front, Sierra Club, League of Conservation Voters, etc. So now that we have a mindset and a team of champions, what do we want to do with what we have? What we want to do is start looking more particularly at the variables that go into the total cost of ownership. So these are things like the purchase price, as we discussed, and I've listed off a number of the variables that will help us understand the total cost of ownership. I'm not going to speak to all of them today, but I do want to point out a couple of important points. In your district, if you're thinking about how you want to go about purchasing an electric bus, you want to be clear in your conversations with your team of champions and others what type of bus you're looking at, because there is a lot of difference between a smaller bus that might be a class 4 bus that's kind of like a minivan that holds maybe 25 passengers, or if we want to talk about the larger 66 passenger school bus, which is sort of the traditional school bus that comes to mind. Now, it's important because the variables will be different on each of these types of buses. So for example, the miles per gallon will be more efficient in a smaller bus than the larger bus. The larger buses may be used for shorter routes. For example, in our district, our large buses, maximum routes we do are about 14 miles round trip, whereas the smaller buses do longer routes, maybe 20 miles. And so as we see that there's a lower cost for fuel, these variables will have some trade-off in helping us to understand total cost of ownership. So I want to take us now to a specific case study. That's my district in Croton, and how we applied all of these variables for us to better understand our total cost of ownership. So in Croton, what we did is we took all these variables and we plugged it into a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, to help us make the case for a total cost of ownership being lower on an electric bus than a fossil fuel vehicle. So what we did is we took, for example, a 27 passenger bus. We assumed we were going to get VW funding because we worked with one of our champion team members at Nyserda and CalSTART to help us understand the funding. We then looked at the total cost of ownership as it was spread across all of the households in our school district. And the reason we looked at it this way was because we started to hear people say, an electric school bus costs more and I don't want my taxes to go up. So we wanted to make the case about how the average household would be impacted by this higher purchase price of an electric school bus. And then we plotted this total cost of ownership here on the bottom horizontal axis over a 12-year period. And then we looked at the total tons of carbon emission impact between these various vehicle types. And this is what it really looked like for us. So you can see we plotted that an electric school bus would actually save us money, about $5 per household over the 12 years that we have that electric bus. And the other thing we were able to do was to look at the carbon impact. And in these bars, you can see the blue is for the electric bus and the yellow is for the fossil fuel bus. So we have a much less carbon impact over time with our electric school bus. And you'll see that there is some carbon accounted for. I just want to explain that's because we took into account that there are some fossil fuels that will be in the electric grid that is used to charge our electric school bus. So what I want to do is show you how you can use this type of an analysis to help you in your school district. Now, the slides that will be included in the slide deck that's available to you at the conclusion of the webinar has all of the backup material that we use to the assumptions that we used in our graph and the resources. So I just want to make sure that you understand we have that available. So now let's talk about this tool that can help you in your school district. We call it the BEST framework. It stands for Bus Electrification for Student Transportation. And it's a framework to compare fossil fuel buses to electric buses. And this tool, which is really an Excel spreadsheet, will automatically generate the trade-off and analysis to help you convince stakeholders in your district about the total cost of ownership. So this tool is available for free on our website, cure100.org, and you can find it in our resources tab. So what I'm going to do now is shift and actually do a little demo for you of this, what we call BEST framework. And what I'm doing is right now pulling it up on my screen. And this is, as I said, an Excel spreadsheet that will help you do this cost analysis. So I first want to show you the basic components of this spreadsheet, and then we'll walk through it a little bit more. The first thing you'll see at the top here, we have the fossil fuel bus component of the spreadsheet that's going to help us with our comparison. And then you look just below that, we have the electric school bus portion of the spreadsheet. And then we have total cost of ownership display that I'll show you some variables that we can use there. So what you see in the right column here, the yellow, this is the only column that you have to be worried about. This is where you're actually going to input variables that pertain to your particular school buses and how they're used in the funding in your school district. So what you'll do as the user of this tool is just fill in the variables in this yellow column. Everything else in the spreadsheet is already formulated for you. Now, another component of the spreadsheet or the tool I want to show you is over here to the right. This is columns G and H. This is where we've built in resources right into the spreadsheet to help you if you need some guidance on some of the fields. So for example, here we see the purchase price of a school bus. If you don't know what the purchase price is and you haven't yet received a proposal from a vendor, you can just click on this link. It will take you to the New York State Office of General Services prices and contracts for school buses. And for example, here you'll see a 20-passenger bus. You'll see the electric price at $312, and you'll see the diesel price at $55,000. So you can scroll through this contract price list and help you understand what some of the costs might be for, or purchase prices for your school bus. So what I want to do now is show you what happens once you've actually input all of the data. We've pre-populated it for you using the example in Croton. So for example, we assumed we were going to purchase a bus on a bond financing at 2.5%. And what you can do is down here on the bottom of the spreadsheet, you see the different sheets and the way the information is displayed. Right now we're in data input sheet, but what we can do is with a simple click of the mouse, click on total cost of ownership, that's the tab down here at the bottom, and it's going to run that graph for us. And so what you see on the graph now is a cost comparison between an electric bus and a fossil fuel bus over 12 years. With the variables we put in, we can see that the electric bus is actually going to cost us about $14,000 more over the life of the bus over a 12-year period. And so one of the things we wanted to look at is, can we express that in a way that would make a more compelling case for our school district? So if you come back here to the data input screen of our spreadsheet, what we can do is look at that total cost of ownership. And instead of looking at it just per vehicle, we can look at its total cost per household. So I'm clicking on the box here, total cost per household. And what we're doing is taking that $14,000 and spreading it over all the households in our district to see if it might make a more compelling case. You see here, I've put total number of households in our district is 3,476. Well, if you didn't know how many households you have in your district, you can still come over here to our resources tabs. That's tabs G and H, and you can click on the link in this tab. And what it's going to do in this particular case, it will take you to the National Center for Educational Statistics. And if you come over here, you can just click in your school district. I'll show you. I'll put in Croton, and my district just came up, Croton Harmon Free School District. I click on that, and it tells me how many households we have. We can see 3,476. So now I can put that into my Excel spreadsheet, 3,476, and I can click on total cost of ownership graphic. And what this is going to show me is that the difference in cost between the electric bus and the fossil fuel bus comes down to about $4 per household over the 12-year of ownership. And I think we can make a pretty compelling case that the $4, which is about the cost of a small latte, is well worth the investment for an electric school bus. And it would not be a significant adverse impact on the taxpayers. Now, I want to show you another way that you can use some of the variables in the spreadsheet to better understand total cost of ownership. Now, this sample case study I just showed you, we assumed we were going to drive our bus about 10,000 miles per year. But what if I change that and instead we put in 15,000 miles per year? And we can look at how that might impact the total cost of ownership. So I just changed it to 15,000 miles, and I'm going to show you what it would look like for our total cost of ownership. I've put in that data, and I'm going to come back to the bottom tab here, total cost of ownership graphic. And what we see is that we were now able to show a crossover where the fossil fuel bus over time is going to cost more than the electric bus. And our crossover period here is about 9 years. And this accounts for the lower fossil fuel and maintenance than the electric bus. So we can see that by changing the mileage or assigning our bus to longer routes, we can save money over time for our electric bus. Now, I just want to show you the tab down here on the far right of our spreadsheet, the total cost of ownership with the carbon graphic added to it. So you can look at just the cost, or you can also add the carbon. And what I also want to point out with our carbon calculations, this is based on the fuel input into the grid, and it works for any zip code in the country. You just type in your zip code, and you'll get the carbon and fossil fuel mix in your grid. So I see that I'm really running about to my time limit for this presentation. So what I want to do is really close it out with a short call to action. And I'm going to really leave these slides with you to review it on your own. But I just want to encourage all of you to please download and use the Cure Best Analytics tool. And please make it a commitment to purchase at least one electric bus in your school district in the coming budget cycle. And please consider using the electric bus for higher mileage routes to help you save money over time. And so with that, I want to say thank you very much and send it back to you, Lisa.
We are so impressed with the work your organization has done. What an incredible tool. And we will help get the word out about this fantastic resource. So thank you so much, Patty.
And if I might just add, I really want to throw out a shout out to Chandu Vishveshvaraya, who was really the creator of this best tool. And he's on the board of Croton 100 and Cure 100. And he's also my husband. So a big shout out and thank you to Chandu.
Yes, thank you, Chandu. I think he's watching right now, actually. Shout out. All right, thank you, Patty. So now I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Tevin Grant. Tevin Grant has been an environmental attorney for various New York City agencies for over 20 years. In 2017, he started the electric school bus campaign to organize a grassroots effort to push for the transition of school buses from diesel to electric. The campaign has helped to secure VW funding for electric school buses in New York State and advance legislation in New York City to adopt the use of electric school buses. He's also a board member of Empire Clean Cities, working on their Mission Electric campaign to transition private fleets to electric vehicles, and he is working on starting an all-electric school bus company, Green Apple Transport. Welcome, Tevin.
Hello, and first of all, I would like to say a big thank you to the New York League of Conservation Voters, Cure 100, Mothers Out Front, Bedford 2030, Sierra Club, Sustainable Hudson, and Renewable Hudson Valley for inviting me to participate in this wonderful event to let you guys know more about what's going on with electric school buses in New York City, New York State, and the US as a whole. And I hope this encourages you to participate and take action in your local communities and make the world a little bit better for everyone. So how did I become an advocate for electric school buses? Well, I've been at the time that I started on this journey, it was about 5 years ago. And I've been an environmental attorney at that time for about 15 years. So I knew a lot about pollution. I deal a lot with hazardous waste, different chemicals in the environment, and also I've had a big passion from young about cars. Unfortunately, transportation sector is about 30% of the CO2 emissions and general air pollution that we face. And it's definitely a large sector that has to be curbed. And recently it's been going electric, and I've been a follower of Tesla for about from their very beginning, and seeing what's going on with passenger vehicles in the electric space. So I knew electrification of vehicles was a thing, but what got me hooked on school buses in particularly, I went to an event with my daughter. It was a play, and before that, you know, our kids didn't ride the school bus. They walked to school in elementary school. And even I think at our school, there was probably 3 school buses that serviced our school. So I didn't have a lot of interaction with school buses firsthand. And for something that's so large and yellow and easy to see, I think for most people, we ignore school buses since we don't interact with them on a day-to-day basis. And actually that bus that you just saw was one outside of my daughter's school, and I recorded it, and they said that that bus was idling because it was actually charging a battery, because that was a hybrid bus. But anyway, we went to this play, and I saw a whole fleet of school buses, because there were many schools that came to the event, and I could see the smog in the air, and more importantly, I could smell the pollution and smell the diesel fumes. And I just got really interested in learning more about what was going on with electrification of school buses and larger fleet vehicles in general. So that's what kind of got me down on this road to becoming an electric school bus advocate. Of course, as an attorney, I went to do research and learn more about what was going on in New York and throughout other states and the nation for electrifying school buses. And in learning about New York's history with school buses and environmental law, it just felt it was natural that New York should be leading the transition to electric school buses. So as you can see, the national standards for school buses were set at a conference in 1939, which was brought together by Frank Sire, a professor at Columbia's Teachers College. He convened the conference, and that pretty much set the school bus standards for the nation, and they haven't changed much since then. Before that, school buses were a bunch of different vehicles and in different colors, and school bus color, which we think of as yellow, but is actually called National School Bus Chrome, which I thought was a little interesting. Also, New York City is the location of the first lawsuit to protect the natural environment. Storm King Mountain, many of you may have heard of it, that's in lower Hudson Valley, but that was the first time citizens were able to get standing to protect the natural environment. This lawsuit even predated the Environmental Protection Act. New York was really the beginning of environmental protection. Also, TransTech, which is in Warwick, New York, developed the first Type A electric school bus. All of their school buses that they were developing, I think they had one in Long Island early on, but the majority of their school buses were going to California. And I thought this was a little absurd that we were making electric school buses in New York, but none of them were deployed. And also, New York State is the largest user of school buses. As you can see in purple, over 44,000 school buses are on the roads in New York, which is about 1 in 10 school buses in the nation. And it accounts for about 1 in 11 school buses in the world are operating in New York State. And New York City alone has about 15 to 16,000 school buses. Just New York City alone would be a top 10 state for a number of school buses in operation. So it's very important that New York transitions to electric school buses. And then, of course, as you know, and there's an environmental justice aspects and environmental health aspects for transitioning to electric school buses. As I stated before, pollution from the transportation sector accounts for about 30 to 40% of the air quality, the poor air quality that is experienced throughout the nation. And studies have shown that about 200,000 premature deaths per year are linked to poor air quality. And we recently saw with COVID-19 that mortality was increased in areas with poor air quality. So it's not only the direct effects of poor air quality, but it affects your health outcomes from other diseases, and not just the direct impact of poor air quality, which leads to many diseases that shorten your life and reduce quality of life. In New York City, asthma is the #1 cause of school absenteeism, and studies have shown that as many as 1 in 4 kids in Harlem and also areas of the Bronx have some form of lung degradation, which is very severe and impacts many, many kids, and especially in the summer, as the sunlight interacts with the air pollution, it creates low-level ozone, which will trigger asthmatic attacks. So if we talk a little bit more about the health impacts from diesel school buses, particularly, unfortunately, the studies on the effects of diesel pollution are not that great. And the studies are kind of wide-ranging, but they do all have the same conclusion that diesel pollution is bad for everyone that comes in contact with it, especially young kids who are riding these school buses. The US EPA shows that they have no safe level of exposure for children to diesel exhaust, which is pretty telling. But you'll find out that on the school buses, air pollution is about 10 times more concentrated than being off the school bus or riding in a car behind the school bus. And this was found out as early as 2001 by an NRDC study, which is No Breathing in the Aisles. And you can find these studies on my website. And then there was a follow-up study in 2015, Adopting Clean Fuels and Technologies on School Buses, done by the University of Michigan. And this showed that it affected the health and the development of children's lungs and other organs. And the study also showed that there was a appreciable increase in lung capacity for children after these school buses were put on cleaner fuels like low sulfur fuel, diesel. And then in 2019, a study out of Georgia State University showed that school bus emissions and student health and academic performance showed a correlation between test performance and riding on older, dirtier school buses versus kids who rode on cleaner school buses. There was as much as a 10% increase in their grades, which is very significant. So some of the participation that I've done, my action with the New York City League of Conservation Voters and NYPIRG, we tried to get some of the Dieselgate funding apportioned to school buses, and we're quite victorious. We provided a petition of about 50,000 signatures to Governor Cuomo that ended up getting 52 million for transit and school buses of the approximate 127 million from the VW Dieselgate scandal funding that New York State received. So that was a significant amount of money that's gone towards school bus that can be used for getting cleaner school buses. And also I worked on an electric school bus bill in New York City Council. In 2017, it was introduced by Daniel Drum. This bill has been fairly successful. We've gotten, in 2018, we held the committee meeting. It now has a supermajority of support. However, the bill is still sitting in committee in 2021, which is kind of disappointing. I hope that it'll pass by this school year. If not, then we'll have to get it reintroduced because this is the last year of this session and there'll be newly elected city council members starting in next year. And then I also worked with Representative City Councilman Espinal, who's standing to my left in this picture. And he used some of his discretionary funds to start a electric school bus pilot program, which unfortunately was delayed from the DOE, but they did get started on this Earth Day. They started with the first school bus and they expect to have 5 on the road by this school year. The mayor also bought out a failing school bus company during COVID. So the city now owns about 1,000 school buses, which they plan to transition to electric by 2030. So hopefully that will continue and we'll fight to get this electric school bus bill passed to get the rest of the contractors, which are about 10,000 school buses that the New York City DOE contracts every year to transport New York City kids. So thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you don't get too discouraged. It's definitely going to be a long road, but it's a fight that's well worth the effort. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach me by email or call me. And you can also visit our website for some of the materials that I talked about. We have a lot of papers on studies done with air pollution and electric school buses. And we also have a bunch of articles that talk about the deployment of electric school buses around the country.
All right, so our next speaker is Sarah Stiff. Sarah Stiff is a project manager at CalStart's Northeast office. She provides technical assistance and conducts stakeholder outreach for the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program with a particular focus on environmental justice community engagement. Sarah also works on similar initiatives across the country in California, where she is building strategies for small and minority-owned business fleet outreach and related events to bring clean vehicle incentive programs to overburdened communities. She is active in projects that seek to address many factors in the transition to cleaner vehicles, including workforce development and recruitment opportunities. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Let me just share my screen real quick. Okay, is that working for you?
Yes, it is. Thank you, Sarah.
All right. First of all, thank you so much to the League of Conservation Voters and the Sierra Club for hosting this event and for inviting CalSTART to be a part of it. And as Lisa said, I'm really impressed by the work that the other speakers before me have been working on in advocacy. So it's all really great activities going on. So my name is Sarah Stith. I'm a project manager at CalSTART, as Lisa said. CalSTART supports Nyserda with the New York Truck Voucher Incentive Program, NYT VIP. And counter to the name, it also involves substantial funding for clean school buses, clean school bus replacements statewide. Okay. So what is NYT VIP? So this is a vehicle replacement program that provides point of sale discounts for reservable vouchers that lower the cost of new alternative fuel or zero emission buses to make it comparable to the diesel version of the vehicle. And so this price reduction at the point of purchase makes it easier for public and private fleets to purchase these technologies. So the point is to really lower that financial barrier. One important point to note is that vehicle scrappage is a fundamental requirement of this program. So eligible fleets must scrap a qualifying old diesel bus with an engine model year of 2009 or older. And the purpose of this is really to ensure that we are taking on road less efficient and higher polluting vehicles off the roads and replacing them with alternative fuel and electric vehicles. Okay. So for school bus funding levels, so here you'll see the table for the available funding amounts. And so you'll notice that the available funding for school buses primarily focuses on electric vehicles. And so you'll see up to $12 million is available for battery electric school buses. And the funding cap for vehicle can go all the way up to $220,000 per bus for type C and D. And so this is for 75 to 90 passenger buses. And then for the smaller buses that are type A or B, 15 to 20 or 25 passengers, the voucher is capped at $150,000. And you'll see that there is limited funding available for compressed natural gas, CNG, and propane school buses that will cover up to 90% of the incremental cost in comparison to a conventional diesel bus. So for CNG, the caps range from $30,000 up to $60,000. And then for propane, it's $10,000 across the board because propane doesn't have as high of a cost premium compared to the other technologies. In addition to this, there are some locational requirements that to determine how much funding you can qualify for, and that applies to electric school buses only. So the state really wants to demonstrate both emissions reductions by scrappage of an old diesel bus, but also make sure that the new electric bus is in a disadvantaged community or serving disadvantaged communities. So Nyserda is working with the New York City Department of Environmental Conservation and other state agencies to clearly define DACs. And so these are based on demographic factors at a census tract level. And so you'll see here there's a link in the slide that I'll be sharing after the presentation. But this is a link to an online DAC finder, and you can search a specific address to see if it's located in a DAC. So the first step in these locational requirements is to check to see if the electric bus is going to be domiciled in or operated within half a mile of a DAC. If the depot is not located in a DAC, the fleet can still apply for funding by proposing routes that will be that the bus will be running. And so if the route is running through a DAC, that will also still apply. But if neither of these conditions are met, there is still an opportunity to apply for lower funding amounts as long as the requested electric bus will be located in one of the 30 counties with poor air quality. And you'll see these are shaded green on the map. And just to note that this lower level of funding is only available to battery electric technologies, but that does apply for new or repower, which would be a battery electric conversion retrofit. So vehicle scrappage requirements. So once again, I just want to reiterate that scrappage is a non-negotiable requirement for participation in this program. The goal really is to demonstrate reduced diesel exhaust emissions by replacing these old diesel buses. The model year of the diesel engine must be 1992 through 2009. And the vocation and school bus type, so A, B, C, or D, must be very similar, if not identical, to the new vehicle. So the old bus must have been operated at least 2,500 miles in each of the prior 2 school years. And an important note for fleets is that scrappage must occur only after the voucher has been approved. Doing these steps out of order or beforehand could potentially jeopardize the eligibility. So we want to make sure that fleets are aware of this. In addition to those requirements, the number of buses is capped per entity. So the number of buses that a fleet can purchase through the voucher program. So for public school districts, the limit is 5 buses. For private schools, it is 2. And then for any single contractor that wants to participate, it is 12. So if a contractor is serving more than 1 school, this global limit will still apply. Going forward, so the minimum usage for going forward is that the vehicles must be operated for 5 years after delivery and average 8,000 miles per year to maintain ongoing eligibility. And then fleet usage reports are required for 3 years following vehicle delivery as well. And telematics devices will be installed at the cost of the program to enable this reporting. And an additional point is that bus leases are eligible for this program as long as the lease term is at least 5 years. And in this case, the leasing company is the purchaser of record, and they are responsible for working with the lessee to ensure compliance with all these stated requirements, especially reporting. So here you'll see a sampling of the exciting alternative fuel and electric school bus technologies that are available through the program. And 6 manufacturers are pictured here. But one I would like to draw your attention to is the last row, Unique Electric Solutions. So this is different from the rest of the options because it is a repower of an international chassis bus. So this means that they're taking an old diesel bus that still has remaining service life and just replacing the diesel components with the battery electric motor instead. So this is an option for fleets that would not like to completely scrap their school buses and would still like to have a secondary life out of them. So in addition, there is charging infrastructure support. So in collaboration with New York State utilities to really sync up vehicle incentives and utility preparedness to make sure that fleets are really feeling supported, make-ready infrastructure support is included in a separate program. So make-ready infrastructure costs are those that are involved in bringing the appropriate power levels to depot facilities to enable electric vehicle charging. So for this, $15 million has been made available to the utilities to provide this make-ready infrastructure support and resources to fleets that are specifically accessing NYT VIP funds. So you can find a program overview and steps to participate at the link on this slide. So additional information is on the website. But if you need any assistance contacting your specific utility, you feel free to reach out and we can get you connected to the right person. And NYT VIP has our Voucher Help Center, so they are available to answer all your questions throughout the process. They provide support for fleets, dealers, and manufacturers that are involved in this process. This is a very dealer-oriented process because they are the ones submitting the voucher application. And the purpose of that is to relieve burdens on fleets and place it more on the seller. But if any of you have any questions throughout this process, that's what the Help Center is here for. The email and phone number are listed for your convenience. The email is nytvip@energycenter.org. And the phone number is 866-595-7917. And this will be available to you in the recap slides after the webinar. And CalSTAR is also available to assist with any inquiries or direct your questions to the appropriate contacts. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and looking forward to answering more in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sarah. Next, we have Dr. Joseph Ricca. Dr. Joseph Ricca, I believe, is calling in, so you'll only hear him. He is the Superintendent of Schools of the White Plains City School District. He has 12 years experience as a superintendent of schools, serving in both New York and New Jersey. Dr. Ricca was the 2020 to 2021 president of the Southern Westchester BOCES Chief School Administrators Association and president of the Lower Hudson Council of School Superintendents. In this dual leadership capacity, Dr. Ricca guided and supported all superintendents in the Lower Hudson region of the state of New York. Welcome, Joe.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for having me as part of this panel. Thanks so much for the panelists. What an amazing job. I think I have the easiest job today because I get to talk about actuality, right? About putting electric school buses on the road and utilizing them in your school district. And I do want to share that as a story. I apologize for the picture, but really it's the message, not the face, I think, that's important today. You know, I want to go back to something that was mentioned earlier. The major barrier to shifting from diesel to electric school buses, certainly, you know, when you think about it, it could be the cost. But I want to go back to what was stated earlier, and I think it really has a lot to do with mindset. And just like anybody else, you know, I didn't know a great deal about electric school buses prior to my opportunity to participate in a pilot program that allowed us to engage with our service provider, which is National Express, to put 5 electric school buses into the fleet in the White Plains City School District. Now, for those of you who don't know about White Plains, we're a mid-sized but kind of larger school district for Westchester County. We have just about 7,200 children, 9 facilities, and we run about 80 buses a day. And so you can imagine that's a number of buses crisscrossing the city, not even including field trips and athletic events. So this was a pretty amazing opportunity a few years ago to begin this conversation in our community about the benefits associated with electric school buses. So the first step really was learning about the product itself and what is it like to engage with the provider, and how will electric school buses enrich and support the lives of my children. And I go back to Tevin's wonderful presentation related to health and safety. And when you look at the impact that diesel fumes have on humans, but on children specifically, it becomes very difficult to argue against anything that's going to bring those factors down and provide for a safer and cleaner and healthier environment for our kids. So right out of the gate, I was kind of already sold. We then had the opportunity to bring an electric school bus into our community where parents and guardians and students and Board of Education members, really all stakeholders who were involved in decision making, were able to learn about the vehicle, learn about the strengths of the vehicle, and also debunk some of the myths, this was several years ago, that were going around related to things like, you know, the unstable battery, or the charge running out in between routes, or the HVAC not being able to keep up with the winter in New York. All of these different sort of urban legends that may have had some, you know, been based in some truth early on in the development of the product, but certainly now as the innovation increases and as the manufacturers are putting out a better, stronger product each year, they're really nothing to worry about. And we did all of that, and we garnered support from our community, and then we were able to put 5 buses on the road. Now, again, really kind of a unique situation. I don't have an in-house transportation company, or rather in-house transportation fleet. I do contract with a third party, National Express, and that's not always the case, as was mentioned earlier. You know, sometimes it's really hard to have a third party provider shift from a fossil fuel fleet to an electric fleet. And truth be told, we haven't had any increases in EVs in our fleet in about 3 years, but the pilot program is still running. So thinking about costs and benefits, this is the, again, easiest presentation I'm going to give all day. It's all benefit. The only cost is the cost. And, you know, if you think about it, and when you take a look at some of the data that was presented this afternoon, you really can extrapolate a savings when you look at the life of the vehicle, the maintenance, the fuel costs, all associated with the traditional diesel school buses versus the electric school buses. We also have a unique situation in a partnership with Con Ed, where our electric school buses can also return electricity to the grid during peak hours. So not only are we benefiting as a school district from the electric vehicles, but also the grid and the ratepayers in the area can benefit as well. And you can imagine if this was the case with hundreds or thousands of school buses able to put energy back into the grid, you know, depending upon when this becomes a widespread innovation. Our children love them. The kids love them. They are spacious, they're clean, they smell good. You don't have that tailpipe exhaust that we all grew up with. And we can still, so any day-to-day that a school bus, a regular school bus passes you. They are quiet. Children are able to really take advantage. Scenario, great air conditioning, of the benefits associated with a healthier, cleaner road. You do have to have that initial capital outlay. At least what I'm hearing is over time. I'm sorry. Hello.
Oh, we were losing you for a bit, but we got you now.
Oh, okay. I'm so sorry.
All is well, no worries.
Okay, and I know I'm wrapping up. So, you know, what we need to do is we need to create a critical conversation and a critical mass around this innovation, this technology, so that more school districts can see what we're seeing here today through this presentation. This is eye-opening. And when you think about the costs and the benefits, there's no doubt that the benefits outweigh the initial capital outlay. It is truly a mindset shift, and we need to engage in that mindset shift. And just like VCRs, just like LCD and plasma televisions, the costs associated with these technologies will continue to decline, or at least level off, when the market and the space expands. So in White Plains, when we go out again for an RFP and a request for proposal, we are going to put in our RFPs and request for proposals a certain percentage of the fleet be electric vehicles. We want to see more and more each contract cycle, and the hope is that we do get to a place where the majority of our vehicles, if not all of them, are electric vehicles. It's going to be great for our community, and certainly it's great for our kids. Again, thank you so much for having the opportunity to weigh in and share my experience. Nothing but positives, and I'd be happy to answer any questions as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Rico. We really value your perspective as someone that has been involved in this even before the truck voucher incentive program, as Sarah was describing, was up and running. So thank you for your perspective and what you're doing for your school district. All right, our last presenter, last but not least, is my colleague, Caroline. Caroline Hahn has worked for New York League of Conservation Voters for the past 2 years. She's worked on a number of the League's electric vehicles campaign, including the Clean Buses for Healthy Niños campaign, where she co-wrote the League's Clean Bus Guide. Take it away, Caroline.
Thank you. All right, let me just get situated with my screen and let me know if you can see it. Is it up? I hope. Yep, okay, I'll take that as a yes. Hi, everyone. Like Lisa mentioned, my name is Caroline Hahn and I work for the League. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'm going to speak a little bit about our Clean Bus Guide. But first, for a little bit of background, we've been working on our electric school bus campaign called the Clean Buses for Healthy Ninos campaign for about 3 years. And throughout our campaign, we've been very supportive of electric school bus pilot programs across the state. And we've advocated for state and federal funding, as well as local and state legislation for electric school buses. We really want to see more buses, electric school buses on the road in New York, especially in environmental justice communities that have been disproportionately burdened by air pollution and where asthma rates are typically the highest. So we put together this guide as a way to compile all of the resources and the lessons that we've learned since the beginning of our campaign. And over the years, we've had the opportunity to engage with a bunch of communities around the state on school bus electrification. And while we've had really impactful discussions, we wanted to create kind of a more reliable and tangible resource for community groups, for parents, and for other interested folks looking to increase advocacy around zero emission school buses in their communities. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through the entire guide today, but I'm going to give a brief overview of the guide and go through some of the materials it contains in a bit more detail. So we will put the link to the guide in the chat. It's also located on our website and it will be on the last slide of this presentation. So here we have our table of contents page. This lists out all the resources that you can find in the guide. Everything is also hyperlinked on this page, so you can kind of jump to whichever page you'd like to, making it a little more convenient. So the guide includes resources such as pages about the public health and environmental benefits of going electric, particularly for children, including those with disabilities and children of color. It also includes resources such as a myth versus fact sheet, which addresses some common misconceptions of electric school buses that I'm sure we've all heard. It also contains 2 case studies on the New York pilot programs, a sheet about available state and federal funding sources, some of which Sarah spoke about a bit earlier. It contains a chart of relevant stakeholders to reach out to when conducting your campaign, a sheet about the different types of electric school buses on the market, and finally, some campaign tools and tactics. So now I'm going to just show some snapshots of what's actually in the guide. So this page is a snapshot of the case study we did on the White Plains pilot program, which we just heard about from Dr. Ricca. We learned everything we could about the program and then tried to kind of break it down into some of the main takeaways and make everything very comprehensive for readers. And we also did this with the Bayshore pilot program, which is still running on Long Island. Here we have a page on some of the recommended best practices to use once you have acquired your first electric school bus or buses. Some of these include recommendations for charging, how to keep your bus program equitable and accessible for everyone, recommendations for driver support, and the importance of bus route consistency when running an electric school bus or buses. Here are 2 snapshots from the campaign tactics section of the guide. So one of them is social media guide and tips, which is included in our social media toolkit. The other is petition templates and other information about how to successfully launch and run your own school bus campaign. And while a lot of what the guide contains is kind of geared towards advocates, there's also a lot of just general information about electric school buses. So I highly encourage everyone check it out. So thank you, everyone. This was just a very small sample of what you can find in the guide. You can find the guide and more information about our work with electric school buses on our website, which is on the screen now. My email is also on the screen. Please feel free to get in touch with any questions about the guide or anything else you've heard tonight. So thank you so much. And with that, I will pass it back to Lisa. Let me just stop sharing. Yeah.
All right, so I welcome all of the speakers to put their camera back on. We're going to dive into our audience Q&A portion of the event. Thank you for all of those that have submitted questions in the Q&A feature so far. There is still time if you have questions, and for any we don't get to today, we will make sure to follow up with everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. So the first question is for Patty. Someone asked, I think a few people were asking, does your analysis take into account of the longer life of electric buses? So I think you were showing us the cost over 12 years, although we do know that buses will last longer than 12 years. So if you have a response to that inquiry.
Yeah, sure. So yes, that is something that can be extracted out. When we were in discussions with our school district, they actually wanted to see it in 10 years because they want to try to retire buses in 10 years, but in reality, they really haven't been doing that. So yes, the beauty of a spreadsheet, if you will, is you can change variables and extract it out further. So that is something that we can do. And if I might just say, there were a few other questions relating to some finance aspects. And if I might just touch on a couple of them, we were asked about whether it accounts essentially for inflation. And the short answer is we did not build inflation into it. It's something that could be factored. However, it does have a cell for financing. So we took, for example, an assumption in what you saw, our variable we used was 2.5% of financing. So that was taken into account. Some people also asked whether you can get a net present value. You can also get that from the spreadsheet. So the short answers are yes. That's the beauty of using Excel spreadsheets. And if people have specific comments or feedback or additional features they think would be really helpful, we're very open to trying to expand if we can. So we're very open to feedback.
Fantastic. Thank you, Patty.
I respect.
The next question is for Sarah. Is the charging cost installation, since presumably the school has to provide this where the vehicles are hosted, is that covered in any part of the voucher, or are there other Nyserda programs that will cover that for schools? Additionally, are you aware of similar opportunities to offset grid costs in NYSEG territory?
Thank you, Jen. That's a really good question. So NYT VIP focuses just on the vehicle incremental cost. But NYSEG is included in the Make Ready pilot program that is hosted by the Joint Utilities. But that program covers the utility side costs up to 90%. So that includes trenching, conduits, any of that kind of back-end electrical work that's on the utility side that needs to be done, but does not cover the charging station installation cost, for example. That being said, there are service providers out on the market that do provide turnkey solutions that kind of bundle all of this in, like the installation, maintenance, servicing, and they bundle it in a kind of as a service solution for fleets that are interested. So, but at the moment, there is not a program that is providing the installation costs for these. So just to reiterate, the Make Ready program is covering the utility costs to bring the service to the fleet, not necessarily the fleet side cost for installation.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question that I feel as though few folks on the panel could answer. Someone asked, how does vehicle to grid change the economics of electric school buses? And I'm just going to open up the floor.
I can take a shot at that. It's still early days, but vehicle to load or vehicle to grid is becoming a big thing even in commercial vehicle, passenger vehicles. I know the Ford F-150, that's one of their things that they're pushing on the new Lightning truck. But when we're talking about electric school buses, I mean, we have a definite load that we can manage quite easily, because we know when school buses are in operation, and when they're not in operation is typically the times when you're going to need this electricity. So, by the time you have rush hour and people are getting home at 6, 7, 8, when we have a high load, most of these school buses are back at the yard where they can plug in and you can tap into their battery. And the next high load period is during the summer when school buses are in less use because it's generally summer school or activities. And when you're looking at New York City, which has about 10,000 school buses in operation or more, it's rough estimates of how many school buses are actually operating in New York City. We're talking about megawatts of electricity. So that's not a small amount of electricity that can be used. And if you tie that in with Con Ed as a way to manage the load, and when you're using renewables, load management becomes really critical in storing electricity. So they can work with the school bus operators to make sure that these buses are plugged in. And when we're creating excess electricity from solar and wind during the day, you can charge these buses, and then at night you can take the charge from the buses to help power the grid when you have high load scenarios. So it's and then they would pay the contractor some portion of the money, the cost of electricity, back to the contractor who owns the buses. And there's some people who are financing just the batteries for these school buses because they see the second life of these batteries as load management, and they will use other mechanics to make money just from the batteries, while the contractor would only have to pay for the bus itself. So it's definitely something that's being explored, but it's definitely going to be a benefit, but we're not quite there yet as to how the money's going to shake out. But it's definitely going to be a benefit with these buses.
Thanks, Tevin. Does anyone else want to add? I think Tevin pretty much covered it, but okay. Someone asked, several districts have newer buses and are not located close to disadvantaged communities. Are you, I'm guessing Sarah, aware of any changes coming to the incentive programs to expand the use of EVs?
So thank you for that question. So at the moment, I'm not aware of any changes and cannot speak to any future decisions that might be made. But that said, the purpose of this program is to really focus finite resources on priority fleets that have the oldest, dirtiest buses. So that's priority number one, to get those off the roads. And we're using the funding to do that. So I can't speak to what will happen in the future, but we're focusing on the worst emissions first.
Got it. Okay, there's a question. I'm wondering if Dr. Ricca would be able to answer this. Someone said, can we install one bus charger, or is it more cost effective to install infrastructure for multiple buses at once? And if Dr. Ricca, you can answer that, I'm opening up the floor.
Sure. So I can tell you what our provider has, and thanks for the question. They have one large charger that then serves multiple buses and can serve multiple buses. And right now, again, we only have 5, so we don't have that need yet. But my understanding is that sort of like a hub, you can imagine, right, with USB cords. There's similar technology available and continuing to be built upon.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add? Okay. Caroline, you're active with me in the advocacy realm. Someone asked, what state and federal policies should we be following and advocating for to support a more affordable and efficient transition to EV school buses in the Hudson Valley?
Yeah, great question. So there's a few things going on. I think in the past few months, we've seen a lot of talk about electric school buses, especially at the federal level. So there is federal funding kind of tied into Biden's infrastructure plan, which obviously has not passed yet, but that's something that we are going to keep an eye on. And we hope that we do see funding for electric school buses because that could be pretty significant. At the state level, we've been kind of monitoring a bill that unfortunately did not pass, but we will be advocating for this coming year. It is presented by Assemblywoman Fahey and Senator Kennedy, and that bill does not offer funding for electric school buses in the state, but it does kind of make it easier for school districts to buy buses. So that's good, but unfortunately didn't pass, but we still have that in mind. We'll be working on that all year. And the third thing is more so at the New York City level, and Tevin talked about this earlier in his presentation, but it's a bill called Intro 455, which would work to electrify all of New York City school buses by, Tevin, I believe 2040 is the year. That also is kind of stagnant at the moment, but something that we have been pushing for a few years now. So there's kind of a lot going on. And I think, you know, all of this talk of electric school buses has definitely stimulated the conversation about the need for more funding, which is really exciting. So we have kind of seen that mirrored in legislation, but definitely more is needed as always.
Yes, and I think Dr. Ricca summed it up well, that it is about mindset, right? So I'm happy to be having these conversations. Patty, I see your hand raised. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks so much. I did want to add two thoughts on that. One is that we've been advocating for, and it would be great if we had a lot of support, is as it stands now, most school districts get some amount of state aid automatically. And so in the Croton School District, for example, when we take out a bond, the state automatically contributes 36% of that bond amount to our district. And what we would like to see is some legislation that would require that any transportation state aid be directed toward electrification. So this is money that is already being spent by the state. It's being received by the school districts, but not necessarily even allocated to transportation, let alone electrification. So under the CLCPA, where we're looking for ways to direct some funds, this is a great pool of money that's already coming to districts for transportation, but it's an absolute shame that the school districts would use that money to continue to buy fossil fuels. So that's a legislative fix that we think is very important. The other point I really wanted to speak to is Nyserda Policies. And we have had, wonderful personal experiences with Nyserda and CalSTART. They have been extremely professional and helpful and et cetera. But, the underlying policies are ones that where perfect is getting in the way of good. And we think it would be helpful to have a broader conversation about Nyserda loosening up the pool of money to get it out on the streets now. So perfect getting in the way of good isn't going to get us where we need to go. So I just wanted to put that out there, and a great respect and professional appreciation for all the great work Nyserda is doing. It's really policy ideas. Thank you.
What are you handing off to me? You think you're muted.
Oh, sorry. I saw your hand raised via Zoom. If you wanted to add.
Yeah, I just wanted to encourage everyone to reach out to their federal legislators. When Vice President Harris was running for president, she had proposed an electric school bus funding bill. So of course she can't propose it now, but it has been proposed in the new Senate. So you should reach out, and once that funding is approved, obviously it'll move to the states also. So that's another avenue to get the ball rolling. So I encourage everyone to try to reach out to their federal legislators.
To contact our elected officials. Excellent. Okay, someone asked, what do conversations look like with the third-party providers such as Rolling V? Are these companies generally showing interest in going electric? I'm not sure who could maybe answer to that. Maybe Tevin or Dr. Ricca. I'll open it up.
I mean, I'm happy to take, it's a great question. I'm happy to take a crack at it. I think like any other major shift, what's going to require providers in the space to make the shift is the consumer. And the more consumers that are looking for a particular service, right? Think about cameras on school buses. Cameras on school buses weren't a thing until moms and dads and school districts demanded that cameras be on school buses, right? And that cost, of course, got added into the overall cost of the contract, and we understand that. It will require a similar, in my opinion, a similar type of an approach And I think one of the ways to do that is when school districts go out for requests for proposals from third-party providers, if everybody is looking for a proportion of the fleet to be electrified, that will incentivize all providers who are bidding, right, for competition to make sure that they're able to fulfill that. If we don't have that critical mass of momentum, I think it will continue to be fits and starts until there really is some type of a legislative push or some other type of a policy fix that would make this mandatory. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, someone has two comments that I felt like maybe someone on the panel could kind of add to this. Well, first off, excellent presentations by all, says Joe. Second, to the argument regarding cost difference between electric versus fossil fuel buses, one could argue that if we also included the fossil fuel bus externalities of climate impact and increased asthma rates in our children, the true costs of electric school buses are much lower. What price might we put on children who might be medicated to breathe, or a planet that's livable? Does anyone want to comment on maybe the other costs we're not thinking about?
If you don't mind, I mean, I believe, for me as an educator and as a parent, I think that questioner hit it right on the head. What's your child's health worth? What's your child's life worth? What's the environment in which you live worth? And again, we really have to drive this message home to folks that they're priceless. And I'm not here to try and impact negatively people's lives, but what I am here to do is to try to protect children. And if I know that something is going to protect children and make children's lives better, it makes it so much more difficult for folks to argue against that, no matter the cost.
Well said. Does anyone else want to add? Tevin, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I mean, as an advocate for electric school buses, that was one of the main things that I started with. But once you start talking to the contractors, you realize that that's not one of the costs that they internalize. I mean, I think that's the basis for most of environmental regulations and abuse. I mean, it's an externality, which means, what are their actual costs? Their costs are maintaining the vehicle, charging the vehicle or paying for gas, and their drivers, etc. The kids are not a cost for them. And the government also doesn't lump in the cost of healthcare as part of transportation. I mean, the school doesn't see that as part of their costs. And when, even talking to some parents, what parents look for are more teachers, more books, better resources for their kids. Most parents aren't even thinking about the school bus. A lot of kids don't ride the school bus. So it's really hard to bring about what impact these school buses have on the kids, especially if your kid doesn't ride the school bus. And I've found that to be really difficult. And I think that's been a difficulty with most environmental issues, is that the real costs are externalities that don't have a market price. There's no market price for carbon, really. There's no market price for general asthma and health. And that's something that legislation has to probably take into account. And we're looking at that with carbon taxing. So, I mean, that's something that definitely would make, if you add that in, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, my predecessors at the league wrote a white paper in 2018 and found that the switching over to electric school buses would save the state billions in the cost of asthma. Yeah. Okay, we have time for a few more questions before I pass it over to Midge from Bedford 2030 to do some closing and next steps. Sarah, someone wants to know how much, if any, of the VW funds have been allocated?
So at this point, there are applications in the queue, but VW funds are still available. They have not been released yet or finalized yet, but so get your application in soon. They're available, but I don't have the number on top of my head right now.
No worries. Good to know that there's funding still available. Okay, so we have a question for Tevin, and really for folks on the panel that are running their and active in their campaigns. How can the public, including parents and families, get involved in your campaigns? So Tevin, what's the best way?
Well, I guess the best way for people to get involved, on Twitter, I remind the council members every day. I send them a tweet updating how they haven't passed the bill, and I send an article on environment, on something with dealing with climate change, and quite often something with electric school buses. So if you could follow us on Twitter and retweet or like, we actually have one council member that likes my tweet every day, which is encouraging. But the bill is still frozen. But you have to reach out to legislators, and you can go to our website. A lot of the studies and more are on my website, so you can find that information. I'm putting together stuff on what school buses are available and the differences from the different companies that are available, and just general articles about other districts adopting electric school buses. So we have a lot of information for you to use to go to your local school district and encourage them, say, look, this is happening all over the nation. We need to get involved. This is important. It's the costs have been done. The analysis is done. It's clear that this is the way we should be moving. And reach out to us, and we'll help you with any kind of information that we have to make a compelling argument to your school district. What we really want to see is more school buses, especially in New York. California is way ahead, but New York should be right there with electric school buses.
Yes, like I said, we're going to follow up with a bunch of resources, everyone's links. But Patty, how can folks get involved?
Yeah, so thanks. I just want to kind of point out the nuts and bolts of the budget cycle for a school district that helps us think about when the right time is. And I'm going to say now is the time. Because what happens is there is a statewide one day in spring when all school budgets are voted on by all New Yorkers. This year it was May 18. So in order for that ballot to be prepared by May 18, as a practical matter, the school district has locked in their decisions by late February to early March. In order for them to lock in their decisions, they do their deliberative process, say pretty much through November through February. So from maybe September to October, they're really working, you want to start getting those RFPs or requests for proposals in. You want to have your team of champions have this top of mind so that when they're beginning to make these budget decisions in sometime around November, December, you've already made really clear you want to see electric school buses, infrastructure. You want to know what the funding opportunities are. You want to have all of that groundwork laid, certainly by November, December. And to do that, you need to engage with these, transportation director, budget director, school superintendent, school board members, etc. So yeah, that's my response on that one.
Oh no, thank you. Yeah, it's important to be thinking ahead, right? Caroline, do you want to share with how people can get involved in our campaign?
Yes, of course. I would say check out our website. We have our own bus webpage that's right off of our website. Sign up for our listserv. Check out our clean bus guide. We have been trying to do a bunch of engagement activities, especially recently. Things have really kind of ramped up. So definitely just kind of stay in the loop with us. For example, we did a statewide petition a few weeks ago, which we sent to city and state legislators, kind of urging them to pass legislation for electric school buses. So we definitely have a bunch of those opportunities going on. So I would just say sign up and stay in the loop.
Okay, we have one last question before we wrap it up, and it has to do with getting an electric school bus in person so that these stakeholders can see it, interact with it, and also how I think this is kind of directed towards Dr. Ricca. I guess my question is, were people you were trying to get on board in this able to interact with an electric school bus? How did that work out? And also, was the PTA involved in this momentum and getting electric school buses on the ground in your district?
Yes. So we involved all of the stakeholders in our school district when we started having conversations about participating in the pilot program. And yeah, we absolutely asked Lion Electric, the provider or the manufacturer of the school, the electric buses, to bring a bus to us so that folks could see it, touch it, ride in it. And I'll tell you, that made all of the difference, you know, when people had the opportunity to actually get into the vehicle, take a ride in it, and really sort of, you know, it was no longer an idea. It was more about, you know, when can we do this? And oh, by the way, when can we do more of it? And, you know, that was exciting for us. And I think that is absolutely, I mean, folks gave some great ideas in terms of engaging with community and bringing opportunities for community support. I agree with all of those. And definitely having a bus for folks to be able to engage with in the school district is a great opportunity for people to really get excited and to build momentum. I do want to add, there are other opportunities that are available right now. Remember, the American Rescue Plan was just passed by the federal government, which brought a great deal of resources to school districts. So, you know, school districts right now are in the process of planning on how they're going to really invest in their infrastructure in cases. And certainly I would believe that, you know, for those folks who are managing transportation in-house, that might be an avenue where they might be able to sort of, if this is something that's really important to them.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, we have 2 minutes until we're finished, so I'm going to pass it over to Midge Iorio with Bedford 2030, who's going to wrap us up and share some next steps and resources. So thank you, Midge.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, everybody. Can you guys see my screen? Yeah. So I have just the great job of wrapping up this amazing day and cheerleading for what we're all here for. As I said, I'm Midge Iorio from Bedford 2030, and I'm so proud to be one of the organizers of today's event. And to all of our speakers and all of the attendees today, and there are a lot of people on this webinar, it's incredibly inspiring to be part of this motivated group of school leaders, citizens, climate activists, and local, regional, and national organizations all coming together with a common goal to make clean buses for our students a reality. As we've heard today and before today, transitioning our school fleets off of fossil fuel power will reduce greenhouse gas emissions, address health concerns, and it will send a really important message to our children that we are taking steps to combat climate change and ensure a healthier future. This is a time-sensitive and critical priority. Clearly, there are some challenges to making this transition, but as we have seen and heard today, there is a growing set of resources to change the mindset, to create a critical mass, and to make this happen now. And we're going to do it. So please join me in extending a great big thanks to this impressive panel of speakers who participated in today's webinar for your great information and for being willing to continue the conversation as a resource. Speaker contact information will be included in the follow-up email with the presentations that is sent to all of the participants. I also want to extend, well, first I want to send a big thanks to Lisa for being a fantastic MC today. Great job, Lisa, as always. And a great big thanks to the amazing organizations who organized this event: the New York League of Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, Cure 100, Sustainable Hudson Valley, Sustainable Westchester, Mothers Out Front, and Bedford 2030. Each of these organizations is doing amazing work to empower and mobilize citizens to fight climate change on a local, regional, state, and national level. Each of these organizations is committed to partner with districts and communities. So please use them, use us as a resource. Website links and information on each organization will be included in the follow-up email. Thank you everyone for attending, and here's to collaborating for a zero-emission school bus future in the Hudson Valley now.
Thank you so much, Midge. Everyone have a great evening and have a great weekend. And we look forward to engaging all of you at a later time. Bye.